So what I want to show you in this tutorial is how to actually clean up your sketches your scans in order to put them into a presentation. Now the problem that we have with scans is that when they're against a white background, such as a board or a portfolio page, they tend to stick out like a sore thumb. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to get around that so that that's not what somebody's focusing on. So before I begin, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to be creating a sheet, upon which to essentially display these sketches. So I'm going to go to File and New. Okay, right now this is one of my sketches from my sketchbook, and I opened it up and it came in this format. We'll deal with that in a second, but I'm going to go into New, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to create it onto an 11 by 17 sheet. So under the presets, okay, I'm just going to say View as Paper. I switch this to tabloid and I'm going to hit OK. And what that does is it creates another file within Photoshop that essentially is this 11 by 17 sheet. Now, right now it's vertically oriented. For me, I want it horizontally oriented. So I'm going to go to Image and Image Rotation and 90 degrees counterclockwise. And then if I click to go back to my sketch image, I'm going to do the same thing too as well. Okay, so what I want to do before I do anything is, because I want to turn this into a black and white drawing, I want to take all of the color out of it. There are many ways of doing this and many ways of doing things in Photoshop. But the way that I find to be the easiest is just to change the mode. And what that means is that if I go to Image and Mode, you'll see that there's grayscale, there's index color, RGB, CMYK, so on and so forth. If I select the grayscale, what that'll do and what it'll tell you is that you're discarding all your color information. Okay, so if I hit discard, what that does is it turns it grayscale. Now, if I affect it at all, it doesn't make the pixels into colors, it makes them into black and white. Now what this does in changing the mode is that basically it changes the home mode of the file right now, so that if I have something in color, okay, even if I'm clicking on my color, you'll see that it turns to gray, okay, basically in my fills. And what that means is that it's in grayscale, okay? It's not recognizing color. So if you ever find that you're trying to work with color and it's not, that check your mode, because it's probably in grayscale. What I can do is I can go into mode again, and I can change it back to RGB, CMYK, whatever I want to use. And that'll restore the color information. You'll see that this now goes back to being color. So it's not a permanent thing, but I just find it to be the quickest and easiest way of making my image into a grayscale image. And now what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to click it and I'm going to drag it into my 11 by 17 file, bring my mouse in and let go of my mouse button. Okay, and here what you'll see is that I do have an 11 by 17 sheet, and then I have my sketch, and my sketch is, it's showing up pretty vividly, okay, with the gray background, and that's what gets distracting when we talk about presentation. Now what I want to do is basically I want to turn this sketch into what looks more like a hand drawing. Okay, I want to get rid of all this information. I want to clean it up so that it's nice and clean and that it's not distracting in the whole presentation of my sheet. Okay, to do that, if you go again under Image and Adjustments, you'll see that there's all these adjustments that you can do to this image. And also, what you can also do is if you have an area selected, it'll just affect that selected area too as well. And what this does, and I encourage you to play with all of these, is these will start to change your image. So if you need to change any of the hues or saturations, okay, if something is, too blue or too green, you can always change it there, so on and so forth. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go into curves, and I'm going to start to change the look of this here. And you'll see that there's a preview for it, so that if I click and I adjust, okay, these volumes, you'll see that it does different things to it. Okay, I might not want to do that. It's a popular way of working with it, okay, and I can keep working with it, but you'll see that if I start to work with it a little bit more, it's going to start to come out the way that I want. Okay, so depending on what you want, okay, I'm just creating this here and just clicking and moving these points on this curve, and again I can add more just by clicking on the line and I can adjust it. Okay, so I can do this and get those lines to kind of pop out a little bit with my curves. And then what I can do is I can actually go into adjustments, and I can work with, curves again. I can do it with the levels, but also with my brightness and my contrast. So I'm going to create more contrast, and I'm going to lighten it up. Okay, so that hopefully the lines start to pop out. Okay, and the white starts to go away. And I can keep doing that. Oops, not levels. You can also work with levels too, but I find that brightness and contrast and curves are the easiest way of going about it. Okay, doing that, and then brightness and contrast, and getting more contrast in those lines. Okay, and it's really just this process of back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And just working with these tools, okay, to get what you want. Okay, what I can do, recognizing that I'm never really going to get rid of this or this, is that I can delete that information out. So if I take my selection box, okay, which is right up in the top, create the area that I want to start to mask off. And then what I want to do is I want to delete all this other stuff outside of it, okay, outside of my selection box. So as long as I have everything selected, okay, if I go to select an inverse, what that does is it inverses a selection and actually selects the outside, so that when I hit delete, all of that will delete out. And if I do Control D, that deselects that selection box. So you'll see that I'm getting close. I might just go through the curves just one more time. Okay, bump up those black color. Try to get that white out of there. Okay, I'm just going to go back a little bit, hit OK. And then what I can do if I want to fine tune something is, again, take my masking tool. Make sure it's my rectangular marquee. And I can work in areas too as well, so I don't have to be restrained to the whole thing or constrained to the whole thing. I can work a little areas, mask them off, and start to work with, for example, a brightness and contrast again. Okay, or I can say this area, I want to work with the curves in this area. Okay, and I can do that just by working in that area there, using my masking tools. If I do Control D, deselect, I can still see some of this. Okay, so again, I'm just going to go in and work with my curves. Okay, I might make this really dark so that if I go into my image and my brightness and my contrast, okay, it might show up a little bit more. So that's basically the process. So that now when I move it around, you really don't see the background. Okay, now what we want to do at this point is we want to start to go in and we want to start to clean up some of this stuff around my image. Okay, and there's a few tools for doing that. A couple are the patch tools. Okay, there's this healing patch tool, these spot healing brush tool, these healing brush tools, and this patch tool. And what this does, so I'm on the patch tool, is I can essentially create a circle, okay, or just a lasso around the area that I want to get rid of. Okay, and I can click and I can drag it to an area that I want the result. And what it does is it essentially stitches those two areas, and the result is to have it be blank. Now this is a really great tool. It's really easy. The only issue is that when you start to get to edges, okay, might recognize this edge, okay, as, let's say for example here, it might recognize the edge a little bit. Let's do it again. If I get a little too close. Okay, and you'll see that it comes up with this little gray, wispiness that you might not want. So that's the limitation to that tool. So I'm going to undo that and deselect that. But that's a really good tool. The other is if I take my lasso tools. So again, by taking that rectangular lasso, going up to image, edit, fill, and then if my color adaptation is checked, I can say OK, and what that does is it goes through and it essentially gets rid of that information too as well. We'll look at that a little bit more. What that essentially does is that blends in this area with the rest of the scene. So I'm going to deselect this. What I can also use is, like the patch tool, there's the healing brush tool. So as opposed to selecting something, okay, I have to do Alt-click to select the area that I want, and then I can just use a brush, and using that brush and using that area defined by the Alt, what it does is it heals those two things together. Okay. The other way that I can do it is if I know that this is white, okay, I can change my color, my fill color to white, or what I can do is I can use my eyedropper tool and I can select whatever that page looks like. Okay, so if it's not a white page, okay, I can just take my eyedropper and click and it'll take on the properties of the color of that background, and then I can use my brush tool to essentially just paint over those pixels, okay, using the color that I defined by this as my foreground color. Okay, again, it might be a little bit more tedious, but the thing is, it's not really a quick process if you're going to do something of good quality and do it correctly. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue working with the brush tool, but what I want to do is I want to actually bump up the size of my brush, okay, because right now it's doing it in little pieces. Okay, I just want to get it done a little bit quicker, so I'm going to go up to my brush size and I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. And now I'm starting to get rid of information. Okay, if I move around, there's a little spot here, and I'm getting rid of it in larger swatches. Okay, so here you can see that now my sketch is more integrated with the sheet of paper and the presentation underneath.